I remember the day I moved into that old bungalow. It was late autumn, and the sun had nearly set by the time I finished carrying in the last box. The place wasn't anything special, just a small, single-story house with creaking floors and windows that seemed older than my grandparents. But it was cheap, it was quiet, and it sat at the end of a long, empty road. That isolation was what I wanted. I needed a place to focus on my writing, to clear my head after the chaos of the city. The first night was uneventful. I made a quick dinner and tried to settle in, but I felt on edge. I chalked it up to nerves. After all, I was alone, miles from any neighbor. Every shuffle of the old pipes, every groan of the wooden beams seemed louder. I told myself it was just the house settling. Places like this often made strange sounds. Still, I slept with a lamp on in the hallway. The next morning I woke early, eager to start working on the manuscript I'd been struggling with for months. I remember sitting at the small desk I'd set by the window, looking out into the woods. Thick pines stood tall and silent. No bird song, no passing cars. It should have been perfect. Instead, I felt a growing sense of unease. I kept thinking I saw something move in my peripheral vision. Just the faintest flicker of shadow near the doorway, or a shape beyond the glass reflection of my laptop screen. When I looked up, nothing was there. By afternoon, I was tired of feeling jumpy. I forced myself to get some air. Outside, the wind barely stirred the trees. The quiet was so intense it felt unnatural, like the landscape itself was holding its breath. Back inside, I made coffee, paced the living room. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that loneliness and silence can play tricks on the mind. But it got worse. That night, as I tried to fall asleep, I thought I heard whispering. I'm not proud of how I reacted. I froze, barely breathing, straining my ears. After a long silence, I convinced myself it must have been the wind in the eaves or a half-dream as I drifted off. Eventually, I forced myself to believe that and let my exhaustion pull me under. Over the next few days, I found little things that disturbed me. A scrap of paper on the kitchen counter, written in my own handwriting, that read, "Check the attic." I stared at those words for a good 5 minutes. I had no memory of writing them. I tried to think logically. Maybe I jotted it down absent-mindedly as a reminder. But what reason would I have to look in the attic? For hours I tried to ignore it, focusing on my writing. When that failed, I relented and pulled down the creaky ladder to the attic hatch. The attic was dim and dusty, stuffed with old boxes I hadn't bothered sorting. I shone my flashlight around. I can't say what I expected. Maybe a mouse nest or some old family mementos. Instead, I found a full-length mirror leaning against the far wall. Its surface was grimy, the frame chipped and tarnished. I wiped it with my sleeve and caught my own reflection. I looked tired. Just that. No ghosts, no monsters. Yet I felt strangely unsettled, as though I were intruding on something private. I climbed back down, feeling foolish. The following night, I struggled to sleep again. I kept hearing soft creaks and distant thumps. Old houses do that, I told myself. But there was a peculiar rhythm to it that set my teeth on edge. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and wandered the house with a flashlight. The hallway felt longer than I remembered, as if it stretched away from me. The rooms looked normal, yet somehow different, like when you see a photo of a familiar place taken from an odd angle. Nothing was overtly wrong, but the atmosphere was suffocating. The next morning, my phone refused to charge. I tried different outlets, but nothing worked. No internet either. The router blinked uselessly. I could have driven into town to get help, but it was still early, and a part of me resisted leaving. Maybe I was ashamed to admit that I was rattled by a place I'd chosen specifically for its solitude. Maybe I thought I could tough it out. I found another note on the fridge door. This one said, "Don't trust your reflection." My handwriting again. This time I felt anger and panic mixed together. I was certain I hadn't written it. Why would I keep leaving these messages for myself? I tore it down, crumpled it, tossed it in the trash. But the words stuck in my head. Was I sleepwalking? Could stress push someone to write notes they don't remember? I tried to test myself. I stayed up until I was sure I wouldn't drift off unconsciously. Despite my best efforts, I must have fallen asleep at the desk because I woke up hours later, head throbbing. When I checked the fridge, there was another note. He's waiting upstairs. Upstairs meant the attic. I cursed under my breath, grabbed my flashlight, and marched up there, determined to prove myself wrong. The attic looked the same. Dusty boxes, that strange mirror. But now the mirror wasn't where I left it. It stood in the center of the space. I swear I'd propped it against the far wall. As I approached, my reflection came into view. I'm not sure how to explain what was wrong, but something about my face in that mirror felt off. My expression seemed slightly twisted, as if I were sneering, though my real mouth was set in a firm line. I took a step closer, and my reflection seemed to lean in too, but not perfectly in sync. There was a tiny delay. I tried to laugh it off, blaming my tired eyes and the dim flashlight beam. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my reflection was studying me. I left the attic in a hurry, nearly stumbling down the ladder. Back in the main room, I tried the radio to break the silence. Static. My chest felt tight. I wanted to leave right then, drive away, find a motel in town. But it was past midnight, and the idea of stepping outside, into that oppressive emptiness, terrified me more than staying in. I forced myself to rest on the couch, pulling a blanket over my shoulders. For hours I lay awake, listening to every creak. Eventually I drifted into a fitful doze, only to snap awake at a faint tapping sound. It came from the living room. I got up, heart pounding, and found the mirror from the attic now leaning against the wall near the front door. I hadn't moved it. Someone or something had brought it here. My reflection stared back at me, and this time I didn't even pretend it was normal. The face in the glass was smiling. I was not. I tried to run. I opened the front door, fully intending to leave, but the night outside was pitch black. No moon, no stars. My car was out there somewhere, but the darkness was so absolute it made me dizzy. I slammed the door shut, fumbling for the light switch. The bulb flickered weakly. The mirror stood there, silently mocking me. I approached it, chest heaving. My reflection's expression never changed from that crooked smile. I whispered, "What do you want?" I was talking to a mirror, to myself, and I knew how insane that was. There was no answer, of course, just my face staring back. But as I watched, that reflection seemed to mouth words I couldn't hear. I could have sworn it said, "Let me in." I'd never known true terror until that moment. I grabbed a chair and swung at the glass, hoping to shatter it. The mirror should have cracked, but the chair seemed to hesitate mid-swing, as if I'd lost my nerve at the last second. I stood there panting, unable to bring myself to try again. The fear was too thick, immobilizing me. Hours passed in silence. Eventually my mind began to grasp a terrible idea. This wasn't an external haunting. The notes, the movements of the mirror. Maybe I was doing these things myself, too exhausted or unstable to remember. My reflection's twisted grin could be the product of my own imagination, warped by stress and isolation. The scariest possibility was that nothing supernatural was happening at all. I was trapped with my own unraveling mind. Dawn finally came, a weak, pale light seeping through the blinds. The mirror was back in the attic when I checked, though I never heard a single footstep. My phone still wouldn't charge. The internet was still dead. I had no appetite. I sat at my desk, fingers on the keyboard, and realized I'd hardly written a word since I arrived. I'd come here to find inspiration, and instead I'd found something else. My own darkness, magnified by silence and loneliness. I'm still here. I haven't left the house. I tell myself I'm just tired, that once I rest, I'll drive back into town and laugh about how spooked I got. But I keep putting it off. I watch my reflection in every surface, waiting for it to move on its own. So far it hasn't, but I can't shake the feeling that it's only a matter of time. I know this much. The human mind can conjure horrors far greater than any ghost story. In the quiet of isolation, your doubts and fears have nowhere to hide, and they can grow into something monstrous. I came here to be alone, and now I understand that there's nothing more terrifying than being locked in a house with your own thoughts, unable to trust your memory, your senses, or even your own reflection.